Blog Talk Radio.
Peace, family. Thank you and welcome to your Life Food Family Program Live. Special episode today. We have the amazing Dr. David Jubb featuring the universe inside our mind. Dr. Jubb, mate.
Hey, mate, how are you doing? It was really great to connect in with everyone today. Yeah, it's amazing, of course, because music is, of course, food, and life music is this 4-3-2 beat of hertz cycle, where you've got A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, A up in the crown and G down in the groin area, and you've got them these frequencies continuously sort of repeated. But as you've got your 12 overtones nicely sort of being opened up and open and remaining open, you've got all the frequencies running. Otherwise, stress could have been in the body, and it's really good that people can be relaxed, and let go of things. But it's amazing because, each letter has an energetic potency of itself, of course, and the letter E, for instance, certainly is for energy, and A certainly is for shelter, and B was for provision, and this sort of thing. And sounds also, words spoken, and letters in the past, of course, and words spoken had more a mathematicalness to itself, which this is something which in our programming is possible for us to have our listeners and people viewing the program to become more aware of this. But the idea of God was just sort of this formative force that's within space. And this formative force, of course, in space, everything we see around us that has shape, including DNA and RNA, has this encoded intelligence within. And language is really like what DNA and RNA is. And the Toltec and my teacher Cloud here in America, and the Dogon, of course, in ancient past, they deeply held words which, as these words sort of really are spoken and heard, they cause us to become a bit more suddenly ever more enlightened, and with every sort of chipped away sort of bit that's sort of not original, it's possible for someone to becoming sort of more eye-aware. Yeah. But if modern science is not wrong, apparently written language only had an apparently made appearance, just right before the pyramids, which is amongst the most technological feat ever incurred on the earth up to this point, the Pyramid of Giza, with its measurements and everything. And it's just not possible for 5 or 9 generations of people all of a sudden to be there, and then bam, you've got this pyramid, of course. But the Toltec tradition seems really very, very ancient, and the Dogon does too. And it goes really way past, the settlement of things happening in the Nile and that. Yeah. But, not all we would say is perfect necessarily, of course, and the Atlantean colonies, they often formed alliances with people, and some of these people they were really into the fertility cult, which was really raging 50,000 years ago quite on the earth. And then these fertility cults, they were practicing all sorts of mutilations and things And the Atlanteans called people who were not seafaring people, they called them Yus, Y-E-W-S, and the Y stood for sort of the feminine crotch, like as in yoni, so people that were sort of really influenced by the fertility cult were all called Yus, and so if they were not really from the seafaringness, they just were called by the Atlanteans Yus, which sort of Jews comes as a derivative from today. But, those are people back in those days, which was a matriarchal society, and that they said that they sort of owned their child's organ, especially the boys, and then they would sexually mutilate their boys, you see, which, of course, you and I and most of our listeners could probably consider that's really quite insane, while sort of very injurious and sort of costly and damaging to life. But people could have a very deep knowledge, somewhere there, like what we're talking about here, yet they could be just sort of getting run over by a truck, But the Egyptian sort of counterpart to all of this was really the Atlantean, of its Atlantean origin, and this is really what the Toltec shaman, and the Dogon, sort of really still have a very deep insight and into today, including invisibility and levitation and other dimensions existing in multiple realities. But diamagnetics is something which they've really understood quite, and that sort of works on a 90-degree angle from the magnetic axis of things, but it works in a sort of a three-dimensional field, not just two, like what you could see on a piece of paper, perhaps, but like a line drawing. Magnetism sort of really flows around the Earth, and around our body, and diamagnetics just it flows on a reticular magnetic field out from the body. And there's sort of the polarity reversal in flows of our body, and our gravity wave is generated by these two sort of heliotical sort of dipolar elements in space. And these diamagnetics is like north and south, is a reversal of this pole flow. This diamagnetic, there's an in-betweenness, like of a broken 8 sort of zone, which is a neutral zone. And this dipolar vector force field is incurred, by the magnetic and electrical energies coming together. But negative north sort of has a spin counterclockwise, and positive south spin plasma to the right, and quadrupolar sort of neutral zone does sort of radiate out in a 360-degree sort of polarization pattern from our body and magnetic fields. And this is sort of like a dipolar cycle of electromagnetics, and it has two types of spin, as we've been talking. Gravity, so gravity really was discovered a lot and understood by the ancient Atlanteans, and it's really incurred by a gravity wave, around 10 to the 12 hertz between the optic visual wave and acoustic wave that sort of fits right in there. But this uses sort of cosmic photons, and these photons are about 10 to the minus 11 per second in its size, so it's like very, very small, But on this level, you wouldn't really not even notice an explosion on the third dimension much. You have an invisible force field, and even as this sort of invisible field, which Tesla and these people sort of talked a bit about, setting up sort of Star Wars sort of things. But we have these invisible fields certainly, but not possible really to pass through. And on this level, you you've got I, you see, and you've got this field of I. And M, it sort of really begins at about 10 to the minus 11th, and it starts to get bigger. And you've got the gamma ray, 10 to the minus 8, and X-ray, 10 to the minus 7th, and ultraviolet radiation, and you've got visible light, 10 to the minus 6, and then you've got infrared light, 10 to the minus 4, and gravity, 10 to the minus 3, is a broken 8 to get 0, sort of. Then this is all between auditory and acoustic, and you've got a counterclockwise and a clockwise sort of spinning of energy happening between these two sort of fields of acoustics and sound. But biology, you've got a flowing of non-spin energy belonging to the neither pole, causing various sort of spontaneous sort of levitational systems in our body, including the blood corpuscle, which we might be able to get to. But people in times sort of past sort of really even fought wars to control the Earth's portals and grid points, that exist. And plants use the water in such a similar sort of way of levity and grid points and flow systems of valving, just sort of similar to an electric coil. But a large stone, that's sort of pointed in an area sort of is really charged and easily can be lifted at its, center mass by slightly just sort of upward sort of pushing pressure by applying sort of what's called sort of bow tie, sort of knot levitation, Yeah. But the ancient ones sort of really knew how to do this. But you've got to shift stones. You've got to get a vortex of gravity toss. It's a little bit like what happens with Nibiru as it sort of gains speed to break away from around the sun. But human levitation really is induced by dehypnotizational trance involving sort of more a negative gravity. And levitators sort of apply sort of 4 directions, like you could get somebody seated and put 4 people around them, not north or south, but in a cross-vector-like direction, and to form these 45-degree cardinal points as a gravity antenna. Then you've got like a quadrupole position, and a centered, seated person can be surrounded by alternate hands weighing down on the head, and they can be just slowly, quickly lifted off, of course, one by one, and then the weight purposefully sort of is released, and at the same time that weight is being released, you've got that seated person can be lifted just with a couple of fingers each from each person. They can lift that person right up in their seat. But the secret sort of life is dipolar, and without opposite poles, you've got no really attraction sort of existing, nor repulsion, and you don't have any movement nor life. But acoustic levitation of stone, by the Atlanteans really was done by sonic generators, and they did this with vibrations and condensing sound to nullify gravity there. But a 90-degree angle of arc of some 19 instruments used to be used, and 13 drums and 6 trumpets and 4 rows of people behind each instrument would achieve sort of something very similar. But Cloud, she told me that in ancient medicine people would, get behind a small little sharp drum and with a very sharp sort of distinctive sound. The chanting then would sort of begin and slowly increasing its tempo and of its singing, and then the drumming also would increase and projected toward a large rock. It would be this large rock would be put into a shallow dish like rock, flat rock, and it would collect the energy, and this large rock would begin to sway and become weightless. And if it wasn't done right, of course, it would split in half. You'd have to start again. But the Earth's center distance was known back then, and the distance to the moon center also. And these ratios have been applied in various spacecraft, of course, and things. but the applied sort of harmonics and the anti-gravity, levity, and weightlessness, of course, you could look up and see the moon is sort of hanging up in the sky, and how does it do that? And the sun also, But weightlessness sort of has incurred a very large objects like the moon, of course, and even a large stone. But the city of Jericho was really brought down just by a shaman being asked what to do, and they circled the city for 3 days and then just blew their trumpets and created a standing sound wave. And that just sort of broke the buildings down but let the people be sort of all free sort of thing, And that's the city, that's the story of Jericho. But Atlanteans sort of really had very sophisticated insights, into the mysteries of hyperdimensional physics and anti-gravity. And they really sort of had a great ability sort of to have these sort of things unlocked, Lukey, The Atlanteans had ships that really had these beautiful large donut ring-shaped coils, and they had very small sort of metal plasma ball in the centre that was made out of a very amazing, beautiful titanium. And the small amount of negative hydrogen ion that was released inside that of the superheated water, but the water wasn't able to expand until it was put into this titanium plasma ball. And as it was released, of course, it sort of specially sort of treated before it was released. It caused an enormous amount of heat in the inner chamber, but you couldn't feel that if you were outside because there's a vacuum that's created inside the titanium chamber, keeping it insulated from the fusion that's taking place. A few million degrees of quasi-neutral foam sort of would occur in that plasma, insulated from the walls of the vessel, and that ignited a vacuum that was in between, that caused cosmic photon to flood into that empty space. A donut ring having cardinal points shaped to 9, points like in the mathematical square was used to create phase conjugation. And these cosmic photon would flood into this empty space, of course, and collect in these coils. An enormous amount of electricity could be produced, and these magnetic fields had powerful torsion fields, which the Atlanteans knew a lot about, of course, to create electrostatic sort of propulsion. And the Atlantean ships sort of had tanks filled, of course, with negative hydrogen ion, and excited electrostatically, they could become positive. And yet the containment of the vessel was negative at the exit point of this, you see. And so that caused an enormous electrostatic propulsion. It could be controlled. Cloud said these craft could sort of travel certainly and keep up with a comet around about 60,000 miles an hour. Certainly not going at the infinity, of course, because that would just fragment into nothing. But these craft could certainly travel at 60,000 miles per hour. But it could easily keep up, as we were talking, with a comet. But the capacitors of unique size used frequency to create an electrostatic charge, and once received voltage just like 30,000 volts between these two plates. Cloud said the Atlanteans called these phase toss, but without any moving parts, sort of these phase toss had little to no sort of any moving parts to wear out, and they were very sleek, sort of saucer-shaped phase toss, and made out of very thin, strong skins of metal. That negative metal were underneath them, or aluminium, titanium sort of on top. But these phase tops sort of applied sort of an iron wind to begin flowing down sort of and creating this electrical charge with a heavy sort of molecule flowing down and lighter molecule flowing in at the top of these craft. But the Atlanteans craft easily levitated, and a picture of one of these sort of certainly is in the hieroglyphs that sort of left in the pyramids in Egypt and things. And certainly there's lots of these that have been found, of course, but been hushed. But the spinning ions created around the shell of these craft, caused a revolution of around 50,000 revolutions per minute of a plasma body around the shell of the craft. But the cosmic particle is like a photon as a neutron and is superluminal, just like monatomic element is, that we could bring in with the life colloid and Jubb's white gold and other monatomic element, like certainly the Irish moss and these things. But cosmic particle sort of is a photon as a neutron, and it's superluminal, and this is tapped in structure perpetually, of its ability to sort of tap into 0 point. But, this is something going on within ourselves, and we're sort of really feeling elevated, and you feel light in your body and in your mind's eye to be able to see. And weight is really sort of what's held back, and this is sort of something which is a disappearingness as we're talking about this. But all light sort of coming into your body comes in out of the darkness, not the other way around, and then it's directed, it can flood into the darkness and create degrees of luminosity, just as a sea and an ocean. But cosmic biophotons are condensed into life and matter as we know it, you see. Of course, life is sort of biophotons condensed, and matter is diatomic element condensed, crystallized, like rock. But the ancient ones knew that sound could sort of energize us and could also be disruptive, and stripping energy. And the two poles of the brain firing together sort of create a beautiful amplitude of electricity where limited mind function really is reduced. And the electron flow, the Atlanteans knew, Cloud and the Toltecs teach. They knew how time was equivalent to creativity instead of money, as today. And they taught sort of a spiritual process called eye awareness. And Atlanteans sort of really practiced sort of a gender egalitarianism, and they witnessed this application of the psyche, also as sort of being applied psychological warfare in some of these places, which were controlling people with fear. But during later times, sort of chaos, certainly, Cloud sort of said that much deeper insight sort of existed into the use of sensory motor complex and behaviour and music and this sort of thing. But modern people are sort of being taught, and civilization's not always followed a linear progression, sort of as we're sort of indicating in our program, as we're sort of talking about things. But evidence certainly exists of campfires and activities existing 164,000 years ago, and a fact that 130,000 years ago certainly resources are exchanged over very large distances on the Earth. 77,000 years ago, you've got humans recording information, on stone and things that's been left behind, of course. And then some 74, because a lot of other stuff would just be wiped out by tsunamis and all sorts of things, But and then folded into the earth and underneath the ocean. Then some 74,000 years ago, of course, all was reduced to the possibility of only, maybe 10,000 people or less individuals. Of course, you've got dinosaur bones and human bones that are being found together, and then all the pieces and things that's found of the past could really just only fit on a billiard table, really, But the Atlanteans knew about the law of square and phase conjugation, and the Atlantean, certainly Toltec teaching, is sort of really describing and defining how matter is formed and its sort of elementary parts in sequence. But the Toltecs teach 3 ways of responding congruently and meta-responding and incongruent response, and these follow sort of string theory of only 3 sort of thread intersections, a loop across and looping. And this is what Cloud really came onto the scene to teach quite a bit, and is the basis of a lot of the human development trainings that's happening on the Earth at the moment. But Atlanteans didn't just sort of simply guess at string theory tenets, you know. They had very deep, sophisticated awareness, and that all is the product of these threads of vibration as perception, and perceptually sort of a wakeful state, and awake left this trail behind of a triboluminescence, and a trail of sort of cosmic of photon is also left behind, connecting us and particles that were together, and even seemingly over sort of quite large and now distantly apart, those spaces existing between the two parts. There's a connection and quite a connectedness to these two parts. That's now, even if it is so very far apart. But you've got an orderly and a uniform space, and you've got tangled and you've got sort of chaotic space. And the Toltec and the Dogon and the Toltec talk of Wonkan Tonka, which in their minds was this creative energy in empty space, and being God sort of being invisible and within the very small and on the finest level inside an interon or as an intention to create and establish, things, but sort of make physical the dream time. But the Native Americans today, as yesterday, have chants that are very old, where sound song, is really on a public knowledge, and listened word much really sort of is lost today, because of pre-existing relations between the spoken and written glyphs, but especially having sort of similar sounds, basically often have derived, sort of common elementary sort of denomination in itself, But the Toltecs, like I in our language, meaning the same thing, and I in everyone else's language, as the originals also meaning the same thing. But the Toltecs didn't have a written language much, nor did the Dogon, and the medicine person is sort of really taught to define relation in words and sound, and physiology that's created, and the locus of control and the projected analog, But similar sound and pictogram sort of resembled the Amazi, which was the original people of the lands of the Atlantean colony that was sort of undeveloped, who predecessed the Berbers, in it. They have Atlantean blood, these people. But the Atlanteans certainly found amongst the Berbers and also the Creek Indians, and then amongst the population today of others, of course, as well. But Cloud told us that the heart responded to warm colours and care, and pink was used, and then blue was used as a colour code to code the heart to not really respond and have much care. And sounds, M sounds, are used for feelings close by, and F and P and D sounds were sounds flicked out and away from sounds put onto the life form. And the very subtle sort of ways of undetected sort of by the unsuspected mind, people could be controlled to produce sort of an armed prostitute that could commit legalized sin. But warmongering, Cloud said, really was caused by sound sort of coming into language, and like like whir and roar and rough and rung and right and that sound was put over the conquered people and put into their language even. But a word that meant something, they'd even purposely turn around the sound to try to sully the meaning of it and that sort of thing. But to submit, through enforced ritualized learning, so society could sort of have someone do loveless work, while other kin could have enjoyed sort of a longer life and this was the primary role of the fertility cults back 50,000 years ago, where love's work was really sort of owned, and love-less work was put to be, of a person that would be man-aged instead, But
that's
in
a half hour.
You right?
We might be still recording, but the half hour is over. It might still record if you want to close it.
Oh, well, we could keep going, will we, or what? Or no? You just...
I can, let's see, I guess we can keep going. I don't know how much is going to show up on the episode, though.
Right.
You know what I mean? If it has stopped recording yet, or if it's still recording, I will be available.
Well, we can go on a bit to talk about this time. Cloud sort of talked about this more as shiny bones, a time, when people got metal traded from the Indians, and they came in these foam houses, of course, recently, which they called foam houses just because it was a house on the water. It often had a bit of foam in front of it, so they sort of saw it as a house sort of with foam or something, Yeah. How are we going with the program? Is it good, mate?
Oh my goodness, amazing.
Yeah.
It's definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Jacqueline says it's still recording.
Oh, I see. Well, that's amazing. We've got listeners out there in the universe. It's incredible. But, it really was a time gone by of shiny bones and these foam houses that the Native American Indians, but they had 4 genders also, and they didn't have just 2 sort of polarized versions as these fertility cults sort of created, which we sort of have a version of in this convention now sort of thing. But the natives had these 4 genders, and that was not really related to sexuality at all. That's all been corrupted a lot, all of it. But the 4 genders included the Winnooks and Burdook genders, and they were peoples amongst us who really could walk both indoor and outdoor type of beingness in ourselves. And they were the most prized people, of course. But gender was really not based on sexuality, of course, and nor was any person's union. But that's sort of been a fullness of today's sort of convention, which, this what we're talking about is more Aquarian times. But it was sort of based on existing lived mutual assistedness and extended family and loyalty and opportunity sort of that existed because of this, and sort of more of qualitative self-efficiency and an established proficiency of being, more. And our relation in being was more connected more in a kin way like this. But the most prized being in our balancedness was not really polarizedness of gender, which is of occurredness today, But the Winnooks and the Burdooks could collectively were able to walk both sides of life, and instead inside and outside, and typically sort of brought the tribe the most wealth, being by far sort of the most sort of cross-disciplinarian, as living spirits. But yet warmongering sort of has really left a huge divide between people, and it sort of has created this polarized version. And the doggone sort of became corrupted a bit by that. And they, of course, sexually mutilate the boys, and they prepare the boys a bit like in warmongers do as prostitutes and things sort of thing. But song today, in the native tradition is the music Cloud told us so beautifully is the music of time gone by and time today, which is this live music, and it would take a little time to come up in its music, and then take some time beautifully to come down. You start up high, and then you're slowly working your way down, in this chanting, and when all call and response sound songs and sound singing, is done, in the lodge and things, which are so many lodges in times gone by, my goodness. But certainly, patterns have sort of crept into influence, like the 440, the down beat and down the scale sort of thing, and polarization in modes of communion versus integratedness and this sort of thing. But the fertility cults on the fringes of Atlantis, they applied Atlantean knowledge to subjugate others, and Atlanteans simply called everyone that wasn't really a seafaring person a you, and so they often settled more on the outskirts because the fertility sort of cult was sort of a coming into integratedness more with this gender egalitarianism which the Atlanteans are teaching, But the living spirits controlled by a fiction taken over and not sort of really being reframed as it is here in this story. Could have had a trauma reenactment syndrome having occurred where the victor, the victor's behavior was really sort of learned, and that was sort of really harvesting other people's energy and having not sort of really been able to keep one's own energy, you see, because of the things that were taught. But fear could have dripped into the blood of the person such, ongoing, and that blood could have not really been available for creative process and thinking and repair. And the body sort of such would have not been able to rid any waste either, you see. So the priests and the politicians sort of had ways of using the Atlantean deeper insights and things to even have created sort of psychological warfare or to even control people, like is what's been going on today. But the blood would have not remained in the viscera, in the digestive tract and in the brain, but then it would have been just sort of mobilized into limb for flight, fright sort of response. And then typically sort of the living being sort of is just struck, you see. But the story, this is a real beautiful story about shiny bones and what Cloud talks about as hollow bones as being sort of remembered being of a time of the great chieftain Lukey, yeah. But Atlantean mining and trade and exploration sort of really would bring a beautiful sort of economic promise, as well as fear of losing deep sort of ancient ways of life. But Cloud told me that it sort of would take at least 4 years to learn from her all the analogue and dialogue necessary for me to be able to possibly teach some of this. And I sort of went on the road with her sort of after apprenticing for 4 years. I went on the road with her for another 5 years. But to learn enough to pass on a lineage fully to the next medicine person, that really is a great responsibility. And still yet I need to connect back in with her about things. But first there was sort of empty space, this is what the Toltec teach. And then sound and sight come into this, and you looking within and not outside yourself. A Toltec teaching is to look within more, and also the value of most of our spontaneous creative intelligence as self is something which can't be sort of made up out of old parts, like, people have been taught in some new religion, like somebody could jump into your body or something is made up out of old parts, which it's not. But to be beyond the past or anything historical, certainly, the birth of the past sulliedness sort of contaminates sort of what's new, the Toltecs teach, to not sort
sort of really be made up out of anything secondhand whatsoever, nothing at all secondhand, and not certainly of anything old jumping into anything new. They thought that would be crazy, and only people could be controlled this way, you see. But that's another program. But totally not the same river, Lukey. You know what I mean? It's obviously not the same river. And this they call Tunkashila, which is the warmth and blood here and now. And this is sort of like a Christ-like energy that you have inside yourself. And Cloud called this having hollow bones. But this is sort of eye awareness, and this beautiful balance in you of the self-realizedness of no story, exactly a half of yourself eternally empty, and then the other part of yourself making up am. So you've got I and am, another half exactly. That's the body expressed sort of as caring and affection. Yeah. So anyway, perhaps we'll catch up to each other in a future show. I think people should really learn to live with their bodies more open, as God is I am also, and not as a person or a singular gender. Cloud thinks that's a bit silly, but perhaps we should go on a bit and talk in the future the story here and about integratedness versus sort of warmongeredness and integrated thinking, Yeah. You there?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, mate. Yeah. Well, if there's a way for us to record a little bit more, it's quite possible for us to then put pieces of this up whenever you love or however. Yeah. Anyway, this is Dr. David Judd. This is Lukey as well. How beautiful. It's amazing. And we'll be talking about shiny bones, Atlantis, and levitation. I think we should get a little bit more into anti-gravity and things such like this, and language, and this convention that we're living in. Anyway, love you guys. We'll catch up to you in a future show.
Thanks, mate.